Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan in 1998. Here is the Blu-ray, and yes, we are finally here with a film that I rewatched last month. It's been a while since I reviewed it, of course. Between the review and the actual rewatch, purely because since kind of a year ago when I last watched the film, the ratings and stuff have slightly adjusted in places. So I wanted to be exact, and I've actually done some shuffling around on some films as well. It's very complicated, my list, so I had to be sure, and I just wanted to, of course, kind of leave it a little bit and let it kind of absorb once again. Although I have seen this many times, it's not as if I didn't know what to think of the film or anything. It wasn't the first view, I've seen this probably all the way through at least 25 times. I used to watch this quite a lot, when I was younger, and I kind of try to watch it every year now, kind of thing. And it's one of them Spielbergs, like Schindler's List and E.T. that I do try and watch every year, Jurassic Park as well and stuff. And of course the Indiana Jones trilogy. This film, very popular, of course. It's known to be one of the best, certainly war films, if not films of all time. IMDb, it's in the top 30, I believe, still. Very high score, of course, on that. Critically, massive success. The box office, a complete smash. 1998, the same year as another massive war film that's not as popular, but you could say just as critically acclaimed, and regarded by some cinephiles, and that is, of course, The Thin Red Line. Now, I have, of course, reviewed that film, and it is one of my favourites of all time. I did compare it, a little bit to this. I said cinematography, I think, is better in that film. I do agree with that still, even after rewatching this. I do think there's some things that are overall better in The Thin Red Line, but as an overall picture, as a film, in terms of my preference, for me, this is the film that does it. I think it's definitely the best film, the war film of that year, and it's definitely, for me, among the best war films of all time. This film, of course, won Spielberg his second Oscar for Best Director, of course, and it got 5 Oscars in general, in total, and yes, this film, as I said, regarded as one of the best, and for me, it is one of the best films of all time. It's just cinematic perfection, and what this film really means to me, and just the way it moves me and stuff. And this film has got some criticism over the years. Most films do, of course. There's not really a film where there's no criticism. You could say even The Godfather, some people don't like that, but I think this film, overall, despite some of the criticism, I think it's such a loved film, and of course it has been said to kind of glorify war, and I don't even agree with that. I don't think actually this is one-sided at all. I think it merely shows us the horrors of war, it shows the tragedy of war, but the honour of it within more within the kind of groups, the kind of not the kind of overall, as say America and stuff. It's not doing that. It's not glamorizing war, and of course the way the shocking nature in which of course this is shown, the battle scenes, of course, Normandy, D-Day, of course, Omaha Beach is the opening scene. Kind of basically after you see the elderly veteran at the graves and stuff, but basically the opening scene is this, and it's roughly 20 minutes of this battle. The way this is shown clearly shows that this is not glamorizing it. It's a realistic, shocking portrayal of war, and of course it's not saying that this is a great thing, of course. So I don't even agree with that criticism. For me, this is a perfect film. Of course, I do think there are better war films. The Deer Hunter, Apocalypse Now, and even actually another Spielberg, of course, Schindler's List. I think it's a better film than this. But this film, it's certainly one of the very best. This film is absolutely overwhelming with emotion, and of course, yes, it does show the kind of the honour of war among people, the actual soldiers more. But it doesn't. It's not a one-sided film. It kind of has a balance, and it does show how tragic and kind of how horrible it is to see people's lives just like that, kind of disappear. At times, it seems like they're fighting for a lost cause, and just how unnecessary war is. How it kind of, so many people lose their lives, and of course, it honoured. Spielberg wanted to honour this, the veterans, while also, kind of involving the audience. In this very realistic and kind of gritty portrayal of war. Of course, Janusz Kaminski worked with, of course, Spielberg on this, and they've worked on many, many films. This is just some pairing. I think, of course, they actually removed the coating, from the lens that they used, and of course that kind of desaturated the look of the film. It added to that, and of course it affected the way the light came in, to the lens, and it really just added for a more authentic image, and just a kind of actually transporting you to that time a lot more than if they hadn't done this. Of course, there's things they manipulate the frame rate throughout the film, and just overall, the shaky cam kind of, you could say, for me, it's one of the very best cases of this, and it's not a film where it's constant like that. It's obviously in the battle scenes, and it has got beauty within that. The way this film is shot, especially with the landscape shots, and just the way nature is captured, it's truly wonderful. I can understand how some people say that it's better than The Thin Red Line. For me, the cinematography overall is better than The Thin Red Line. It's Malick we're talking about here. It's hard to compete. I think Days of Heaven is better than any of the Spielberg's cinematography. Probably, I think that's very hard to beat ever. Could be in the top 5 cinematography of all time, or at least very close. But again, I think Spielberg here with Kaminski just created one of the best shot films of all time. The way this film is directed, overall, is perfect. It really is. And of course, yes, the basic story is John Miller. Of course, Tom Hanks, who's one of my favourite actors of all time. He gets some hate, but that's because he's a loved actor and he's a nice guy. So of course he'll get hate for that. That's just the way it is. He is brilliant. I will not hear any other word about him. And for me, he's one of the greatest actors of all time. And this is one of his best performances. Really is a wonderful performance. Wow, it really brought me to tears once again. And of course, this film is so emotional, and it's basically the story of them, his squad, led by him, Captain Miller. And yes, basically they've sent on this mission to rescue James Ryan, who's kind of the fourth brother within this family. And all at the beginning, basically, all the other 3 brothers die. And yes, basically, in order to kind of for honour and stuff, and to kind of not allow this to happen again, for the mother to lose her 4th child, and that means all of them gone, within this, they kind of are sent on the mission to rescue James Ryan, and of course along the way they lose people in order of doing this, and yes, of course the final third of the film, James Ryan comes into play, of course played by Matt Damon, who again is one of my favourite actors. This film has a really ensemble cast. It really is wonderful. Ed Burns as well, great actor. Tom Sizemore, he is stunning in this film. Really underrated in terms of, no one really mentions him in this film. He's kind of one of the closest friends, of Miller, Tom Hanks' character. And he really is just such a presence throughout the film. He is wonderful in this film. Stunning performance. And all these characters. That's one of the things I think it definitely beats The Thin Red Line with as well, is the characters. These are more relatable and better written characters. Despite how perfect The Thin Red Line is, I think this is even better in characters. It gets me invested in these characters more, and then I'm able to kind of emphasise, more of this and kind of be moved more. And people, of course, do die. It is a war film. People die along the way. And yes, I'm more moved by this because I'm actually invested in these characters and just how kind of fleshed out they all are. They all have their kind of their flaws as well. Even Captain Miller. But again, they're so kind of likeable at times, and kind of they've got so much exposition. It's great, and it's just a journey. It's so warm in this sense. The kind of band together of these characters, the warmth of the squad, and kind of how they kind of look out for one another, and of course the tragedy of when they do die, and that kind of just sums up the whole war. And it's done more on a personal scale than a lot of war films actually. Even though you've got the big set pieces, it's very, very personal. It's kind of a very it's very, very low key in terms of the actual group. It's very, very small amount of people here. You could say that it focuses mainly on them, and of course it does open up at times. But again, it's mainly very, very focused in that sense, very personal to these characters. And yes, the journey along the way, it's truly spiritual. One of the most human films ever made. Leave it to Spielberg to create this, and of course. It's really weird, how this guy can make so many great films that are so different. He's just a genius. not only did it for me, the best of the 80s for me, the director, easily. He's probably the best of the 90s as well, with Schindler's List, Jurassic Park, and this alone, all some of the greatest films of all time, I think. And just the variety in that, and the length of the films as well, adding to the kind of what you get out of them, of course. I love epic films more, potentially. So I think really for me, Spielberg donned the 90s and the 80s, not the 70s, but yes, I think stunning director, my second favourite, of course, and this film is just one of his many masterpieces. Of course, the way this film is shot is really like no other film. Of course, the battle scenes, and many people, of course, say that the Omaha Beach is the greatest. I disagree. I think actually even topped by the later battle, because it's the one that comes in the last third of the film. Basically, the last 40 minutes of the film is kind of the setup and the final battle to this, and it's kind of this operatic sequence, this devastating sequence that kind of, for me, it tops the opening sequence battle scene. I think actually it's just because as well you're more invested in these characters by this point. Actually personally invested. It means more, and also the way this battle is shot is actually better for me. It makes more use of vertical axis. It kind of just is more varied, more intense. The tension is even higher because of the geography. Of course, the buildings, the sniper part. Of course, the building explodes and stuff. It's just something else. It really is. Of course, there'll be some minor spoilers, of course. But yes, glossing over that, that's kind of a bit of a spoiler there. I'll include that in the description. But yes, the final battle is so emotionally draining. But again, the way it kind of, you're invested so much in these characters, at least I was, and then you get this final sequence where more tragedy ensues. It really is. It does top the opening sequence for me, the battle sequence. And yes, this film for me is one of the very best. I think the script is truly wonderful. How human this script is, how kind of spiritual it is, and just, as I've said, all the characters, the way they're written, the exposition is just masterful here. But of course, the actual way that we're kind of able to dig into humanity through the script alone, it really is moving stuff. This is a film that I've seen many times. I think I actually saw it when I was about 8 years old for the first time, probably about that age. And yes, I think many people have views on showing young kids stuff, violent stuff like this. But I think if it's a film like this, where the best intentions are, here, and Spielberg is showing a human film and the tragedy of war, I think there's nothing wrong with showing younger kids this if they're 8 or 9 or 10, because it's not a gratuitous film or anything. I think actually, it really affected me. I was completely crying, as a kid, and every time since, of course. It's just, this film gets better and better the more I watch it. It just really is one of the very best for me. I think there's not a flaw in this film in any frame for me. The music, of course. Now, we haven't even started on the music. John Williams for me is the greatest composer of all time, not just film composer. Just, really musical artist. I think even I prefer, him to the Beatles, who, for me are right up there with the very best film composers, and Beethoven as well, and stuff. But, John Williams for me is the greatest musical artist. The way he moves me, just the emotional connection to his scores and the films. This is, again, not one of his top 5, but that's because he's such a genius. I think what they've done, the best collaboration for me of all time is, Spielberg and Williams, and this one is something else. The emotion, the way this builds the score, and it's so overwhelming. And of course, throughout the film, the way the music is used, it's so in tune with the picture, the tone of the film, which is so consistent as well. I think it's truly something. And then you've got the credits, which then you've got a track that's kind of not really in the film up until this point, and it's probably the best track, Hymn to the Fallen. It's so overwhelming with emotion. Makes me cry every time. It's kind of this ode to all these that died, and it's just, wow, it really is an emotional film. And it's not just, of course, because of the subject matter. There's many war films that are flat and they're not, human, and of course, it's not just because of that. It really is a film where the vision, just is perfectly achieved here. It comes through in every sense. Spielberg directed to this film to perfection, and I think the way it moves me, is just it really is something else. Of course, this film is one of my very favourites of all time, and we'll get to the rating very soon. But yes, the action, of course, throughout, it's just so honest, so sincere, and kind of visceral. It puts you into the experience. Well, not in that way, of course, it's not like you're actually there, but it kind of is in terms of cinema and stuff. Because I'm not saying I was actually in the battle in this film, and stuff, but it really does involve you in that sense that your senses are all kind of in tune to this. The sound design is genius, and of course the way the camera moves, the kind of the slow motion, the sound muffling as well. Just little moments, even in the first battle, where you kind of some of the soldiers fall underwater, and it kind of this whole kind of claustrophobic and immersive piece, just this scene, and then of course you have that throughout the whole film. Really, it's this constant kind of this way to create this experience. Spielberg wanted to kind of show and kind of involve the audience, not just show them. And he does that throughout loads of his films. He kind of involves us. We participate in his films, and this one is no exception. It really is something else to experience. And as a film, if you've not seen it, I think it should be on your watch list. I would definitely recommend watching this film. It really is something, and it is very, very sad, of course. It's emotionally draining, but for me, it's definitely one of my favourite films of all time, because I got so invested in these characters. I return to this in order to be moved, which is what I enjoy the most in cinema. Of course, an emotional connection to characters, and of course just visual storytelling, a director and everyone involved creating these worlds for us to kind of get invested in and kind of take part in and immerse ourselves in. And this film, yes, it's one of my favourites. It is harrowing, but it's something that it's of course got comedy in the film as well to kind of ground the film, make it more believable. And it is just these characters, they're so kind of real and kind of yes, they have banter as well and stuff. It's so human. Got so invested in this film every time, and it's just something that, yes, it's such a tragic film, and of course the kind of, I wouldn't say statements, but the messages it brings, is so deep. And of course it speaks for this war and everything, and the tragedy. Yes, there is honour in there that it's portraying and stuff, but really it's kind of a very, very balanced film in that sense. It's not for me a kind of, many say it's too one-sided and too kind of, it's glorifying war. I do not believe this at all. My interpretation, of course. I think actually it's just showing us in kind of a balanced view what war is, kind of thing, and just war in general, not just this event, of course. And of course, yes, just the sincerity, as always really with a Spielberg film, comes through here. And yes, it's something, you're not kind of, it's not a preachy film at all, and of course it's something that, I'm truly moved by, and I'm so invested. So, such a connection to this film that I have to give it, a plus tier as well as a full marks. I think definitely, maybe not high in my top 100, but, because it literally is on the very end. But again, it's in my top 100, and in that sense, it's really now 100% plus tier 1. And of course, I had to kind of decide since I adjusted my boundaries, as I said. I think it was very, very close, but because I adjusted my boundaries, I had to include this as well in the tier 1s. It is kind of, now my top 100 roughly is, tier 1 at least, and then of course you've got the 50 or so films that are tier S, but this film, while not in my top 5 Spielbergs, yes, he's that good. I think definitely one of the best films ever made. For me, it moves me, it makes me laugh, of course, the humour within the group, it's just something where the narrative is so perfect, even though you've got quite a lot of characters throughout the film. Of course, the performances are so perfect. Matt Damon, wow. Wonderful actor, of course. Tom Hanks is just absolutely monumental. Tom Sizemore, have to mention him again, he's so good. Ed Burns, everyone in this film, of course, and just the way this film escalates, what it says as well, the messages, the strong messages, and just my overall investment and my kind of my emotional connection to the film is so high. I have to say this is a tier 1. It's one of the best films ever made for me. The score brings me to tears every time. Just The cinematography, the editing is some of the very best in cinema. I don't think it's better than the Thin Red Line, but again, that's Malick level. Of visuals. I think it's hard to compete with his very best works. But I think as well, just the the way this film is operatic. It's just truly something else. I think the opening sequence is kind of more. It's more shocking. It's more brutal, maybe, but the final battle is for me the best of the film. And of course, the way I was invested in these characters, the way I felt so much, the tragedy of it all, and just the overall scope of the film. And in that final moment, when I was younger, and I finally kind of thought, oh wow, and you see back to the kind of present day in the film, and you kind of see that revelation kind of thing. That is something else. It's one of the best endings of all time, and of course, again, a bittersweet for me. Ending shots. I think it's not one-sided for me. It really isn't, and it's just a war film. It's one of the very best. It's sincere. It's honest. Brutal and flinching. But again, a film that is kind of it's got beauty in there, and the way it's shot, and what it says about humanity, the way people can kind of what people can do for one another on a personal level, and just the way that these people, how many people lost their lives and stuff. But again, it's not one-sided. It's not glorifying that. It's showing every side. There's the tragedy as well. Of course, it's showing how at times unnecessary, of course, war is and stuff. And yes, this film, if you've not seen it, highly recommend it. It's one of the kind of films you have to see. At least give it a go. For me, it's always been one of my favourites. And of course, yes, it gets a tier 1. Of course, another Spielberg that is just something else for me. Perfect film. And of course, yes, Saving Private Ryan. Highly recommend it. It's just one of the best films ever made for me. And yes, cannot wait to review more Spielbergs. Of course, he's my second favourite director. He's the only one that kind of, in certain times, he comes the closest to Kubrick, let's put it that way. Kubrick is my favourite, of course. Stanley Kubrick, and yes, Spielberg was my second favourite. And yes, probably the next one I'll be watching could be Minority Report. Not seen that yet. Of course, I've kind of got it on Sky. I've kind of considered watching it over the next sort of week or so. And it could definitely be the next one. So look forward to that. And yes, of course, thanks for watching my review.